So today I want to talk about perfectionism, and perfectionism is the tendency to set really high standards for ourselves and strive to meet them consistently. And it often comes with careful attention to detail, a strong sense of responsibility, and a desire for quality outcomes or perfect outcomes. And perfectionism can sometimes look like dedication, can look like ambition, or high standards and discipline. And because of that, it's often maybe not questioned, or it's actually admired even at times. But beneath the surface, perfectionism is not about excellence. It's really about our self-worth. So perfectionism usually develops when we learn consciously or unconsciously that being ourselves is not enough. And that acceptance, love, or safety must be earned by meeting certain standards. And because of that, so we learn to strive, we perform, we try to perfect. Not because it necessarily brings joy, but because it promises acceptance and approval from others, which then leads us to learn to approve of ourselves. And also maybe sometimes because deep down there's a part of us that wants to get a medal if it's possible for the most polished human. We all have that little part of us that wants something like that, even though it might sound really dumb. But none of us are born perfectionists. Children don't demand flawlessness from themselves. They explore, try, fail, adjust, and they keep going. Perfectionism is often learned when we grow as children, and what happens is when approval follows achievement, or when we receive love that feels conditional, or mistakes lead to shame, criticism, or withdrawal. Maybe rest is treated as lazy, or being good enough is never enough. So over time, the message becomes internalized, and that message is, I'll accept myself when I do better. I'll finally be worthy when I reach the standard. And this is really where perfectionism usually begins to take root. So at its core, perfectionism is the belief that who you are right now is not acceptable. It's the ongoing rejection of the present self in favor of an imagined future self that is supposedly better, and thus finally allowed to belong or to be worthy. And in this way, perfectionism becomes something that's like a bit of a refined or socially acceptable form of self-rejection. Because you're not really rejecting yourself, you're improving yourself, you're making yourself better. So you're not avoiding self-hatred, you're channeling it into productivity. But I guess I kind of look at it as like dressing self-rejection up in a tuxedo. But really the message underneath remains the same. And that message is, I'm not enough as I am. So perfectionism is really fueled by the desire generally for external validation, for praise, approval, recognition, being seen as competent, impressive, or valuable. And while that's understandable because external validation can feel good, it's also unstable. You can't guarantee it, and everyone's opinion is going to be different as well. Because when you're worse connected to their opinions, then you're going to be always seeking validation from everyone. And nothing you do will ever feel like enough because the judge keeps changing, kind of like a reality TV show or America's Got Talent. The praise can feel temporary or criticism feels crushing. And achievements only set up higher expectations for ourselves. So perfectionism doesn't really bring the security that we think it's going to bring. But what it does bring is it brings a lot of constant pressure. But in that pressure, we also learn some tools as well. Tools that help us survive, things like knowing how to strive, knowing how to work hard, knowing how to be disciplined. We also learn how to achieve our goals. And there can be good, but the cost can often be too high as well. And the expense of perfectionism usually comes at the expense of moderation, play, rest, joy, the expense of listening to our body or listening to our intuition or honoring our emotional limits. The expense can often be fatigue, and our body gets really injured at times too, because the body becomes something to override and feelings become obstacles. And overall, to a perfectionist, the true self becomes an inconvenience and something to ignore. And eventually, burnout, resentment, anxiety, or numbness will follow. Not because you failed, or maybe you did fail, but you were bound to fail because the system you set up was unsustainable. So, perfectionism is driven by the egoic mind, by our conditioning and the ego that says, try harder, don't stop. You're only valuable as long as you succeed. You can rest when you've earned the rest. But the true self speaks differently to the conditioned self. The true self doesn't really demand perfection any times. It doesn't threaten your worth. It doesn't rush. What the true self does is it values your alignment within yourself over approval, your self-love over others' love, integrity over performance, and wholeness over image. And most importantly, the true self accepts you first. It always accepts you. It doesn't only accept you after you achieve something. So perhaps maybe it might be time to start letting go of some of those perfectionistic tendencies. But while that may sound good, it can actually feel terrifying to someone who's a bit of a perfectionist, because letting go can feel like losing motivation, losing identity, losing control, and losing safety. And a lot of people fear that if I stop being hard on myself, I'll become lazy or I won't learn. No, if I'm not a perfectionist, then I'm nobody, or who am I? But really, the opposite is true. So when our self-rejection softens, our energy actually returns. When our worth is no longer at stake, our creativity emerges. And when pressure lifts, our sustainable effort becomes possible and we achieve more. We don't become a nobody, you become more aligned with your true self. The true self, though, doesn't oppose growth. It just opposes violence and hatred against ourselves and rejection against ourselves. Balancing perfectionism requires you to learn to listen to your body, to listen to your emotions, and to listen to the true self. Now, to ask questions like, what do I actually need right now? Am I pushing from fear or moving from alignment? What would enough look like today? Where am I abandoning myself to be accepted? And what would I do if I accepted myself right now? This doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities, but what it does mean is abandoning self-punishment as a strategy, self-sacrifice as a strategy. So excellence that comes from fear is going to be exhausting, but excellence that comes from presence and our true self is sustainable. So the true self doesn't seek flawlessness. It seeks honesty and self-acceptance. And some days honesty looks like effort, other days honesty looks like rest, and both are valid. So when you no longer need to prove your worth, your actions become cleaner, clearer, and more authentic. So perfectionism is not a character flaw. It can be a useful tool at times. It was a survival strategy, though, mostly, that helped you once before. It helped you be accepted and approved of. You don't need to shame it away, but what you can do is understand it and then choose differently. So just pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would I do today if I didn't need to earn my worth? What would change if I trusted that my true self is already enough? Perfectionism asks you to become someone else to be accepted. The true self asks only one thing: accept yourself as you are right now.